Namaskar. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the IC Center for Governance, I have great pleasure in welcoming you all to this second lecture, Sardar Patel lecture on governance. Our first lecture was delivered 2 years ago by the Honorable Vice President, Sri Venkaiah Naidu. I have great pleasure this evening in welcoming specially Dr. Krishna Swami Kasturirangan for this lecture, a man who is a scientist, chairman of ISRO, a former member of the Rajya Sabha, a former member of the Planning Commission, chancellor of the JNU, and so many things that he has combined. A man of many parts. I'm sure every word that he speaks will require our full attention. This was supposed to have been offline. We had programmed it at the India International Center, but COVID restrictions have made it now online. And of course, the advantage of going online is that we have participants attending not only in Delhi, but in different parts of the country. And I can see one person even outside this country. So welcome once again, all of you. And I now request Mr. Prabhat Kumar to formally introduce the keynote speaker of the evening and say whatever he would like to in his opening remarks. Over to you, Prabhatji.
Thank you, Maheshji. Dr. Kasturirangan ji, Shri Mahesh Kapoor, Shri Mukund Kaushal, Shri S.N. Tripathi, Dr. Vivek Agnihotri, Shri Amarjit Singh ji, Shri Tirlochan Singh, Shri Ajay Shankar. In fact, it's not possible to name all the distinguished friends that we have here. Members of the core group of IC Center, ladies and gentlemen. I also welcome you to this second Sardar Patel lecture. As Maheshji said, we would have liked to have this event offline at the India International Center as per the original plan. This was our original plan. 3 days during the last year were scheduled, but owing to the ravages of the pandemic, a physical event could not materialize. Just a moment. Friends, as you are aware, the IC Center for Governance was conceived as a multi-stakeholder alliance, an alliance of professionals from different disciplines. And the idea was to deliberate on governance in general and public governance in particular. The idea was that those who have seen governance from close quarters contribute their knowledge and experience towards better governance. For the last 18 odd years, the center has been involved in several activities, including advocacy and research, training and conferencing, and is publishing a professional journal on governance too. It is also a fellowship program for supporting research studies on governance. But when we looked around on the internet, we could not find a periodic lecture on governance, on the subject of governance. And we thought that it was a lacuna that was waiting to be filled. You see, in the third decade of the millennium, I think confusion prevails. Our problems are big and they are getting bigger. It is in this context that greater attention needs to be paid to the quality of governance. The increasing divide between a few on one hand and the rest on the other, I think it should be studied in depth with a view to ascertain whether there is a correlation between the spread of development and the quality of governance, whether there is a weak or a strong correlation between the two. In the IC Center, We have always believed that governance is too serious a matter to be left entirely to the people in government. For too long, we have left the task of decision making on issues which concern lives of millions of people in the hands of a few people in the government, the political executive, and the bureaucratic functionaries. I think the involvement of the people, individually and collectively, is not only desirable but necessary to target the areas of governance which have been neglected so far. And governance, in our view, is not a static concept. Its institutions, processes, and practices, they change with time and context. I think governance needs to be reinvented, or at least redefined and refined from time to time. However, there are certain characteristics which do not change, like what the Sardar said during the debates in the Constituent Assembly. As we all know, Sardar Patel laid the foundation of political democracy in India. He was an important member of the Constituent Assembly Committee on drafting the Constitution, and he emerged as a very astute leader and a very wise statesman. And he was acknowledged, as we all know, as the Iron Man and a founder of modern India. I think it is expedient that we revisit the political values of Sardar in the light of emerging developments. Sardar Patel has said, and I'll just quote, he said, "It is the prime responsibility of every citizen to feel that his country is free, and to defend its freedom is his duty. Every Indian should now forget that he is a Rajput, Sikh, or a Jat. He must remember that he is an Indian and he has every right in his country with certain duties." The main task before India today is to consolidate herself into a well-knit and united power. Caste and community will rapidly disappear. We have to speedily forget all these things. Such boundaries hamper our growth. Unquote. Now, in order to pay a humble tribute to the memory of Sardar Patel, this series of annual governance lectures in the name of Sardar was initiated by the IC Center. The first lecture, as Mahesh ji just said, was delivered by our Vice President, Sri Venkaiah Naidu. And I'll just like to quote some passages from what he said. While speaking on the features of desirable governance, the Vice President said, and I quote, "It should be remembered, in a rapidly changing world, public institutions cannot remain rigid. They need to suitably change their ways of functioning to meet the mounting aspirations of the people. We have to do away with a lot of outdated and time-consuming procedures and use information technology to promote transparency and provide efficient delivery of service. On the role of civil servants," he said, "the bureaucracy must take the lead in the transformation of institutions. These institutions must be the instruments of efficient delivery of public services. They should have credibility and competence." And he said, "I suggest that we focus on strengthening program implementation, on building up the competence and credibility of institutional structures, and adopting a work ethic that keeps the national interest at the top and public welfare at its core." I repeat, adopting a work ethic that keeps the national interest at the top and public welfare at its core. So friends, for the second lecture, we looked around and we were lucky to find the best person to do the honor was very close to us. Padma Vibhushan, Dr. Krishnaswamy Kasturirangan. He's an extraordinary man who has been living an extraordinary life. He's an eminent scientist, but has a very keen eye on governance at the policy-making level. More than 20 years ago, he explained to me the potential of space research in many areas of public governance. And he gave me a glimpse into the world of ISRO. Though I have known him for more than 2 decades, yet I could appreciate the full range of his multifaceted personality only after I followed his eventful journey. And it was through his recently published book. Dr. Kasturirangan was selected for a very special task by Vikram Sarabhai in the late 60s. He built the Indian Space Research Organization for more than 3 decades and acting as its chairman for about a decade. Under his able leadership, the space program has witnessed several major milestones, like the successful operationalization of PSLV and GSLV launch vehicles. And it was not by accident or by coincidence that Atal Bihari Vajpayee chose him for the membership of the Rajya Sabha. And not only that, Manmohan Singh handpicked him for the membership of the Planning Commission. And Narendra Modi selected him to draft the National Education Policy. That he was especially selected by successive prime ministers. It speaks volumes of his exceptional intellectual sharpness and accomplishments in every task that was assigned to him, whether it was ISRO or the Karnataka Knowledge Commission or the National Institute of Advanced Studies. So friends, we are grateful that Dr. Kasturirangan has accepted our request to deliver today's lecture. And I think I should not stand between you and him any longer. So I request Dr. Kasturirangan to deliver the Sardar Patel lecture on governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Respected Sri Prabhat Kumar ji, esteemed Sri Mahesh Kapoor ji, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and privileged to deliver the second Sardar Patel lecture on governance. I am deeply conscious of the tremendous responsibility I have to shoulder in accepting this honor of speaking on a subject relevant to governance and in memory of one of the most illustrious sons of this country. The maiden lecture in this series was delivered by no less a person than Sri Venkaiah Naidu Garu, our esteemed Vice President, who had a long and illustrious career in the governance in various capacities. It is therefore fair to question whether someone whose career has been steeped in science had the authority to speak on matters of governance. Before accepting the invitation to follow in such hallowed steps, I myself pondered this question very carefully. It is evident that in the present-day context, science and governance have both emerged as decisive influences in shaping our society. On the one hand, scientific search and innovations have become the indispensable handmaiden for good governance and key determinants for a better quality of life for all. On the other hand, sound practices of the governance in scientific research and applications have become absolutely necessary for averting grave dangers arising from scientific endeavors that lack ethics. There can be no better demonstration of this than the deadly pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus and its variants across the globe, followed swiftly by the rapid intervention of scientific research and governance to confront this threat. Therefore, I have accepted the task of delivering this lecture out of a sense of duty to illuminate how science and governance can enrich each other. I have titled my talk as a scientist trust with governance. I think, if I remember, Prabhaji was very happy that I chose a talk of this theme. And he said that I don't think that we have seen that connection earlier. And so I have tried to bring this connection, of course, with areas which I am familiar with, but I hope it will make a sense with respect to my ties with governance. At the outset, I would like to express my deep gratitude to IC Center for Governance for inviting me to deliver this prestigious lecture. The significance of such institutions in a democratic polity needs no emphasis. This center, through its multifarious activities, such as research on governance practices, building policy capacity, shaping civil society role, and creating greater awareness of ethics, have made a mark in the national arena, and I am sure in the international arena too. In all these areas, the life and work of Sri Sardar Patel, in whose commemoration this lecture is instituted, can be a beacon to chart our voyage of progress in the high seas of governance. I owe my gratitude to Sri Prabhat Kumarji, whose persuasive qualities, coupled with his ready acceptance of my suggestion for finalizing the topic, encouraged me to undertake this lecture. His unstinting commitment to ensure dissemination of the information about the activities of the center to a wider range of intellectual community deserve our deep appreciation. In this context, you may also like to know that a recent book by Sri Prabhat Kumarji, Public Service Ethics Quest for Naitik Bharat, is a very unique discussion about the ethics in public service, a subject you don't often get to an opportunity to lead. This book has a special value in understanding the principles and exceptional thoughts on the subject based on a very eventful and remarkable journey in public service of the author. I may recall that my association with Sri Prabhat Kumarji dates back to the time when I was secretary to the Department of Space and he was the cabinet secretary. Sri Prabhat Kumar's deep insights into the multidimensional character of the working of space and the positive support that he extended to the planning and execution of its activities have had a major impact on the smooth functioning of the department. Thank you, Sri Prabhat Kumarji, for this support, even though I'm recalling something many decades back. Sardar Patel has been an epitome of the spirit of sacrifice and stands as one of the tallest leaders of our nation's independence movement. His contribution to craft a pragmatic strategy and its implementation towards unification of India from more than 550 widely disparate princely states and provincial colonies, his vision to initiate and establish an all India civil services, and his humanistic handling of the tragic aftermath of the partition have all left a lasting imprint in the eventful history of this nation. In all this, we can see his political acumen combined with a strong conviction for harmonizing conflicting forces. In a broadcast to the nation on 13th November 1949, he said, and I quote, "The government, industry, and labor must all play the game in a spirit of national service. We must have the fullest sense of national emergency. We must close our ranks as we do in the presence of a common danger. Who flourishes if the country sinks into economic slaving? Who sinks if the country prospers? Let that be our ruling sentiment. Let that be our ruling thought." Unquote. We can see that the strength and nobility of these were reflected in the character of Patel. Is also a reflection of the timeless and life-giving values that we find in the Indian soil, a part of the rich heritage that had been handed down to us. Patel demonstrated through his life how these values can play a vital role in good governance without indeed evoking an overt civilizational or cultural accent for his nationalistic ideology. In the stark realities of today's interconnected world and our challenging national landscape of building a secure, equitable society, the relevance of Patel's pragmatic and rationalistic approach and the acumen of harmonizing diversely complex issues is of a strategic value. It's a common perception that science and governance are two distinct domains, primarily because only a small group of people are active at the interface of science and governance. However, compartmentalizing science and governance can be highly limiting when dealing with new advances in science and its applications. At the fundamental level, science seeks to explore the unknown and to create a new knowledge through the novelty of work carried out by scientists, adding to the existing knowledge base and wisdom. We often call this pure research. To differentiate it from the other types of research, we call it as applied and translational. While pure research often gets the highest attention and recognition, its fruits rarely yield tangible outcomes that are scalable with societal, strategic, or commercial impact unless there is connected ecosystem of applied and translational research. It's important to note that governance structures that are most conducive for pure research are somewhat unique. The pursuit of pure research in science and indeed any other domain necessarily presents a level of uncertainty, randomness, and arbitrariness for the uninitiated. To be a source of valuable scientific discoveries, these endeavors often require unshackling the human mind to its full exploratory, creative, and innovative potential. Often, pure research has flourished in environments that encourage unfettered thinking. Thus, the governance structures must recognize that promising scientists' creativity and originality sometimes calls for a degree of tolerance in enforcing the rules of the game. When we move from pure research to applied and translational research, together with associated development programs, we typically encounter two key differences in the nature of work. First, there is an increasing level of predictability of outcomes and therefore an expectation of steady advancements. Second, such research often demands major interdisciplinary efforts. Both these reasons, research that is applied and translational in nature calls for a more conventional governance system. Scientists who have grown accustomed to the relaxed form of governance appropriate for pure research may find the transition to a more rigid governance structure difficult. Indeed, a key challenge for India has been to develop a thriving applied and translational research community. India's space program is one example where such a community has been successfully developed. There are key reasons to be learned from this developmental journey that are relevant to a broader spectrum of activities at the intersection of science and governance. The most important of these lessons is that the desired development from pure research to application does not emerge through a natural process of an organizational evolution. Indeed, there is a need instead to design and a structured form of governance to deal with issues effectively and to carefully refine this design over a time. At the scale of a handful of institutions, such endeavors can have its own set of rules, which may not be a common with full-fledged governance system as we know today. However, when it comes to national scale scientific endeavors like space or atomic energy program, one faces complexities of linking multiple technology dimensions on one side and requirement of large investments as well as human resources on the other side. Further, there is the most important aspect of a delivery of assured outcomes in time. For India's space program, the core refinements in governance were conceived and implemented over its first 2 decades. This critical period spanned the combined tenures of its first 2 chairmen, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai and Professor Satish Dhawan, and I will now delve into their legacy. Vision is a basic driver for all human initiatives, action, and progress. Vikram Sarabhai's vision for the human Indian space program was an extraordinary act of foresight from a scientific leader. To fully appreciate this, bear in mind the relevant historical context. India was facing severe challenges in the aftermath of independence, and the dominant global perspective on space was shaped by the Cold War. It required a truly remarkable mind to foresee the use of space for peaceful purposes that could provide developing countries such as India an innovative way to leapfrog the process of development. He used this word leapfrogging. He recognized that the promotion of space research, besides contributing to societal benefits and enrichment, could also have tangible benefits derived from novel technologies for economic development and security. Sarabhai emphasized self-reliance not merely as a promoter of nationalistic fervor, but also as an essential guiding principle for developing technology to suit our own socio-economic and cultural context. We are often confronted with situations where the status of our technology lacks the global level. Hence, there is a dilemma on reconciling the principle of self-reliance with dependence on foreign sources. The risk of perpetual dependence, coupled with the need for optimally using our human resources potential, was a cause of concern both for Sarabhai and later Satish Dhawan. I shall cite the strategy that Sarabhai and Dhawan adopted to circumvent this by elucidating India's space communication program. When India decided to go for space-based communication and broadcasting systems, we had to balance the urgency to initiate services in this area with the long lead time that designing and developing an indigenous national satellite would imply. In order to usher India into the era of space communications as early as possible, it was decided to go for a bought-out option for the first generation INSAT systems. Hand in hand, we embarked on the design and development of the second generation systems indigenously. 4 satellites of the first generation were thus procured, launched, and operated for providing space-based communication and broadcasting service for meeting national needs. It is also of interest to note that the procurement process and the resultant interaction with the foreign supplier provided valuable insights into the technology of communication satellites with contemporary capabilities. This know-how in turn helped to configure upgraded indigenous second-generation systems, cutting short developmental times and the cost to realize the same. This in turn enabled the introduction of indigenous second-generation systems into services before the end of the operational life of the first generation satellites. This carefully well-orchestrated parallel process is a shining example of Sarabhai's foresight and Dhawan's organizational brilliance. This strategy has become a hallmark of ISRO's projects through multi, inter, and transdisciplinary approaches. Let me now return to Sarabhai. In addition to formulating his vision, he also had to conceive a viable strategy to initiate the process. He recognized that science was the seed from which India's initial forays into space could germinate into a program that provided societal benefits as he had envisioned. He had at least 3 reasons for taking such an approach. First, being an exceptional scientist himself, he recognized that the Indian scientific community and was a hotbed of innovative and original thinking. Second, by creating the first-class experimental science programs, he knew that he could develop a generation of young scientists with the type of deep systemic knowledge that would be essential to manage complex space projects. By the time I joined the program at the Physical Research Laboratory in 1963, he had already mentored a superb cadre of senior students who had started playing key roles in the early phase of India's space program. I give you some names: Professor Chitnis, Professor Bowser, Professor U.R. Rao, among others. Third, Sarabhai could leverage his extensive contacts with the international scientific community, including top scientists at NASA and MITs, that enabled him to pick the brains of some of the best minds to bring innovation and creativity for India's early space endeavor. PRL provided Sarabhai an academic platform to invite such experts, and it is therefore recognized quite rightly as the cradle of India's space program from which it emerged. To give you just a taste of this exciting moment at that time, allow me to share some of my personal experiences. Because of my strong interest in physics, I was naturally thrilled to have an opportunity to carry out research in cosmic rays under the overall guidance of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. As I was being interviewed for this position, Sarabhai summarized his vision for India's space program. He stressed that the experimental nature of the research that I should be conducting, and in fact, he insisted that I will not go into the theory and only work on the experimental side. Our goal was to design and test new instruments that flew to the edge of the space, and in the process, see using high altitude balloons, but later using rockets. From this vantage point, these instruments had an opportunity to advance science by observing phenomena that cannot be detected from the ground because of the blanketing effects of the atmosphere or for reasons of in situ measurements. I may mention that practicing research can contribute to the development of key abilities in an individual. Among other things, research kindles originality, creativity, and an innovative approach to looking at the world, an ability to our out-of-box thinking, and an approach to coping with increasingly complex problems. Further, research methodology often calls for looking at a particular problem with its multiplicity of dimensions, without which one cannot comprehend the complex picture. To give you an illustration, when I wanted to understand cosmic radiation from outer space in my research, I had to grasp the nature of the radiation, transmission, techniques of detection, the models of the universe that can explain the phenomena. So there is a whole host of disciplines and approaches like physics, astronomy, experimental techniques, developing precise communication abilities, and teamwork, all brought together to design a set of experiments to explore scientific phenomena of interest. This is precisely the type of systems thinking that Sarabhai was seeking to inculcate. Now, decades later, we have echoes of his vision in the national education policy, which stresses the importance of liberal education. Even as Sarabhai actively mentored the scientific activities that seeded the ISRO program, many of which had a pure research flavor, he worked tirelessly for laying the foundations for the next phase. At the same time, there are very few benchmarks for the applied and translational research programs, and Sarabhai further recognized that India lacked an industrial and academic system at that time capable of providing supportive linkages. Therefore, he began to develop a nucleus of a new culture where a large group of individuals trained in these diverse activities, but well versed in working in terms, could drive the transition from space science to space technology and its applications. He set up the Indian National Committee for Space Research in COSPAR, as it was designated, in 1962, from which the responsibilities for the space science and research for the Department of Atomic Energy was transferred. Under Sarabhai's leadership, INCOSPA started establishing core capabilities with specific institutions, including Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station, TERS, Space Science and Technology Center, now Vikram Sarabhai Space Center in Thiruvananthapuram, for launching sounding rockets as well as launching launch vehicles and early satellites. Experimental satellite communication station, now Space Application Center in Ahmedabad for satellite communication and remote sensing, and a satellite tracking station at PRL itself. In 1969, INCO's power was superseded by the Indian Space Research Organization with Sarabhai as its first chairman. Central to Sarabhai's unique conception of the use of space were nationally important applications, such as the direct satellite broadcast for educational purposes, improving meteorological forecasting, which is critical for agricultural operations, and conducting resource services to support national planning. He surveyed the landscape of such applications with a keen eye, and he initiated investigations in all potential applications that could be feasibly validated. However, as yet another example of his tremendous vision, he recognized that it is not enough to merely demonstrate technical feasibility in isolation from the community of users that the applications targeted. He stated, and I want to quote this, it's possible to develop atomic energy and space research through basic, applied and developmental research in islands, largely isolated from the rest of the country. But large-scale applications of either for the benefit of the nation cannot be undertaken in isolation, unquote. Thus, he initiated a major national level consultation with user agencies outside the space system. It is among this crescendo of effort, taking ISRO to the cusp of its next phase, that Sarabhai's life was tragically cut short in December 1971. In the immediate aftermath, Professor M.T.K. Menon took over as the interim chairman. One key step among many that he took on this critical juncture was to organize a seminar as a fitting finale to Sarabhai's initiative to embark on a national consultation process to utilize space capabilities for national development. This was held at Ahmedabad in August 1972. In fact, it came to be known as the August Seminar for Space and attracted over 200 participants representing 78 different organizations and agencies and institutions. Mind you, these are all the early phase of planning ISRO's program for the future. They jointly identified critical programs and projects of relevance to the country. And this seminar helped to re-emphasize Sarabhai's legacy of creating a powerful culture of interdepartmental work among these stakeholders. This culture that places the user community of space applications at the core continues to remain intact even today in ISRO. After Menon's brief tenure, the mantle was passed on to the capable hands of Professor Satish Dhawan. It was Dhawan who accelerated the process of consolidating the diverse sets of activities that had been initiated previously, giving them an organizational focus. Dhawan's tenure from 1972 to 84 was marked by three phases in the evolution of India's space program. This phased strategy is akin to modern approaches of risk management for large techno-social systems by a stage gating process. I will now describe these three phases in some detail, along with the associated evolution of the governance structure that prepared the program for its next phase. During the first phase, Dhawan quite naturally focused on completing the proof of concept demonstrations of activities that had been conceptualized and initiated under Sarabhai. However, he was not simply dotting in I's and crossing T's, but energetically creating a working environment attuned to the complexities and challenges ahead. Is an illustrative example. Consider the development of the satellite launch vehicle PSLV-3. When Sarabhai had initiated this program, he was hand-holding his group through the process of vehicle development by adopting a configuration similar to the four-stage American Scout rocket. in an effort to maximize learning in the least amount of time. Remember, there is no benchmark here for us to work on. Sarabhai consciously split the group into 4 teams, one for each stage of the rocket. By the time Dhawan took over, the downside of this structuring was evident. Integrating the designs of 4 separate teams into a single system was proving to be immensely challenging. Dhawan could have narrowly focused on addressing only the immediate challenge, but this was not his style. Instead, he crafted a permanent solution to the system's integration problem at the governance level. In the case of the SLV-3, this involved identifying a person to whom the overall responsibility of the vehicle could be entrusted. The man he selected was none other than Dr. APJ Kalam. Our key projects that Dhawan led to completion during his first phase included satellite instructional television experiment, one of the largest sociological experiments ever conducted using the space. Using this, they used the American satellite ATSF, a very advanced communication satellite. Then to integrate the conventional communication system, the space system, we used a French satellite and built the ground systems for them to demonstrate those communication systems, and ultimately also developed the variety of application using the American satellite Landsat for in remote resource sensing. These demonstrations enabled ISRO to evaluate the potential of space as a vantage point for addressing the country's developmental needs, as well as issues of scalability at the national level. An important outcome of this phase was the validation of the uniqueness of space in providing new services, as well as assessing the advantages beyond the conventional approaches. Further, this phase offered a low-cost strategy for evaluating the concepts, the systemic issues including technologies, the institutional frameworks, and the user interfaces. Turning to the organizational systems, an important mechanism that created integrated focus and multidisciplinary leadership was the through setting up of a high-level body in 1972. Prabhat Kumarji knows about this very well. I don't have to really. This is the Space Commission, of which he was a member for the time, which oversees and guides the space program in India. It's pertinent to quote here from the resolution relating to the constitution of the Space Commission, which inter alia states, and I quote, the technological advances in the field of space, which are based on developments along advancing frontiers of many areas of science and technology, produce rapid obsolescence, not only on tools and equipment, but also established systems of organization. The sophistication of this technology, the newness of the field, the strategic nature of its development, and the many areas in which it has applications have to be borne in mind in developing a suitable organizational structure to handle this area on behalf of the government. Now, I quote, the resolution also noted that in order to promote a rapid development of activities connected with the space science, space technology, and space applications, the government considered it necessary to set up an organization free from all non-elastic restrictions, non-essential restrictions, and needlessly inelastic rules, which will have the responsibility in the entire field of science and technology of outer space and their applications. Space Commission is chaired by ex officio capacity by the Secretary of the Department of Space, and it reports directly to the Prime Minister. This structure enables the space program deriving its strength from the highest level, and that policy directions are duly integrated by different government agencies. Dhawan now turned his attention to the next phase that dealt with realization of end-to-end systems at an experimental level. Even so, he did so, his foresightful mind was already envisioning ISRO's third phase of sustained operations and growth, which could largely occur after his tenure ended in 1984. Thus, in parallel to the activities in phase 2, he was further refining the governance structure, and the success of the third phase rests on the strong foundation he laid in the latter half of his chairmanship. I will describe these parallel efforts next. In phase two, there was a market shift in strategy to develop in-house experience in the end-to-end realization of space systems, whose potential utility at the national level has already been clearly demonstrated in phase one. Emphasis from phase two includes satellite missions such as Bhaskara and Apple, the Ariane passenger payload experiments acronym, and the development of the Space Launcher System Satellite Launch Vehicle SLV-3 and the Augmented Satellite Launch Vehicle ASLV. Thus, phase two sought to build heritage in space prior to operational deployment. This is a widely respected practice, which duly recognizes that space systems are inherently complex, carry high risks, and investment incentive. There is also a need to minimize the impact of probable early failures in the public mind and the political system. Many of the techniques that have been uniquely evolved for space endeavors reflect principles of sound governance. Dhawan introduced several of these starting early in his tenure with an effective review system with clear accountability and numerous checks and balances. During the execution of complex space missions and projects, uncertainties that arise often call for mid-course changes which affect several segments of the complex system. Configuration management techniques and practices have today become relevant for socio-economic development activities that are invariably multidisciplinary in scope. For governance practices, which need to address multi-stakeholder interests and interrelation between cost, schedule, and performance for evaluation of impact of mid-course corrections, configuration management techniques are highly relevant. The early adoption of the principles of configuration management is a high point of ISRO's management practices in the early and different projects. Global experience with structuring of enterprises in the modern knowledge era indicates a preference for project-oriented matrix structures where the watertight divisions of functional departments are transcended and flexible team working can be enabled, focusing effectively on the outcomes desired. Many professional leaders of today adopt interdisciplinary and mission working to realize outcome targets relevant to the governance. There is a tremendous need for such organizational innovations in governance, which need to be studied and adopted or modeled for practical use. In big scientific endeavors, a structured way of getting things done with well laid out rules and with well-defined scope of financial control, management of the configuration of deliverables, and schedule control need no emphasis. In the governance relating to the introduction of high technology systems for meeting developmental and other innovative service goals, pragmatic strategies are called for. In the journey that India undertook in transforming her to a major space power, the strategic outlook was an essential navigator. In the first place, there was a detailed assessment and evaluation of alternate approaches to arrive at the most optimal solutions. Secondly, there were timely and deliberate decisions on exercising buy or build options considering the time frame for introduction of the services. In fact, the option whether to buy or to build was always built as a part of the original design at the system or subsystem level, retaining the greatest level of flexibility. In the case of buy options, a parallel indigenous development plan was created to achieve self-reliance goal. So there was a pragmatism with respect to the use of technology. We were not averse to using the best of the technologies outside, provided they are available. And this was factored already into the original concept of the configuration of the system. These are some of the very unique features that enable that we don't get stuck up because of the problems of developing a technology within the country. And this is one of the key elements of ISRO's ability to move smoothly over projects by this kind of option and the kind of choices that it made mid-course if it is needed. You may recall the trade-off that I had spoken in this connection for the space-based communication and broadcasting system. For Earth observation system, the one required a different strategy. Although foreign satellites such as Landsat were being used for developing remote sensing satellite applications, special requirements of observation peculiar to our country, our field sizes in agriculture and things of this kind, as well as cost and strategic considerations. They are not easily available because of the strategic nature of the remote sensing satellite. They call for an indigenous design and developmental route for the realization of operational remote sensing satellite systems. The implementation strategy that Dhawan put into place, involving many original concepts and innovation related to the overall satellite optimization, payload design, particularly optics and detectors, and other satellite elements, help India gain a preeminent position in the field of remote sensing satellites. I say this with pride because when we decided to build it on our own, our engineers came with some of the best innovative ideas in how to compact the optic system, how to reduce the weight of certain elements, how to create better control systems. And I would say that by the third generation system which we built, ours were the best in the civilian domain anywhere in the world. So our internal efforts, our decision to make choices with respect to internal systems, and the trust in the engineering capability of the youngsters really paid off in providing India a preeminent position in the case of remote sensing satellites. Launch vehicle technology plays a seminal role in providing autonomy for access to space. There is no question on this, because we knew that if we build a satellite and if the country's possessing launch capability does not support you, then the satellite will be left on the ground. So we need to have an autonomous access to space. In terms of complexities and the barriers that exist internationally for the technology flows, space vehicles experience a high degree of constraints in comparison with the satellites. Therefore, even though we embarked on developments of both satellites and launch systems at the same time, it became necessary to make these two streams of development to proceed independently. India consciously decided to seek launch support outside services from operational satellite from outside agencies, and the development of suitable launch vehicles were still under progress. Such a strategy enabled the timely establishment of space services and also provided specific inputs for sizing the launch vehicle system for these classes of satellites. An aspect of the organizational strategy was to create an industrial base for supporting the space program and for carrying out relatively routine operations. Sarabhai, being an industrialist as well as a scientist, had leveraged his ties to industry for creating ground systems and certain aspects of space systems. Under Dhawan, Space Agency concentrated on pushing the internal output to move up in the value chain. This meant enhancing the quality and content of R&D outputs within the organization. They also enabled us to progressively increase the strength of the highly qualified professionals without increasing the overall size of the organization. Also, in successive 5-year plans, the organization could deliver increasingly larger number of complex missions thanks to the increasing involvement of the Indian industry, who took over the routine manufacture, assembly, and testing, whereas ISRO concentrated on research, development, and the high end of the products that we were looking for. Dhawan also spearheaded several innovations that supported ISRO at the organizational level. Experience from earlier experiments involving broadcasting, communication, and remote sensing, and dealing with the user communities provided valuable inputs for the creation of innovative formal institutional framework. In the case of remote sensing, the institutional framework involved setting up the planning committee for the National Natural Resource Management System in 1983, which at the overall level is mandated to provide directions for the creation of space-based remote sensing capabilities for the country. NNRMS consists of secretaries of the line departments of the Government of India dealing with natural resources. It was initially headed by the member of the then Planning Commission. Such a structure enabled the involvement of major user communities to address issues of ensuring the use of such system in their own areas of thematic applications, while at the same time facilitating the incorporation of these new and powerful techniques into conventional approaches. In a sense, all the stakeholders had a final say on what kind of system they are looking for, space system they are looking for. And in the process, they played the central role in defining the mission goals of ISRO in those areas. Similarly, INSAT Coordination Committee with the secretaries of the user departments, information and broadcasting, communication, information technology and science and technology, along with the secretary of the space department, was created as an apex body to address the development of space communication, broadcasting and meteorology, and planning their utilization. In the context of space science, Advisory Committee of Space Sciences at COS was represented by some of the leading space scientists in the country, provides directions for space science research. These three unique structures was masterminded by Professor Dhawan, and they have played a crucial role in sustaining the various space endeavors. And this is a critical point that I would like to say, because this kind of an institutional structure I have not seen anywhere in the world. And this is something very unique to India, and it has really proved its value in sustaining the space program with the involvement of the stakeholders. Right from the beginning of a design of a mission, right up to its utilization and getting a feedback to improve that, like a new generation system. So this is a beautiful structure that he created. I don't have to say more with it. With Prabhat Kumarji, he was a part of this entire process when we defined and developed this kind of a strategy. Being user-driven further emphasized the culture of accountability and the focus on efficiency. In a conflict-driven world shaped by the forces of globalization, as well as diverse geopolitical and nationalistic interests, the roles and the actors of space activities are rapidly transforming in the global arena. The strategic role of space in security, human and robotic operations in space, and exploration of planetary bodies and management of space environment for safe, secure, and sustainable uses are receiving priority. We see larger roles for private sector actors, and disruptive developments are to be expected. This overall change in the environment calls for a renewal of our approach to governance in space. Developing a national ecosystem for future advances in space must now be considered a priority. In the context of enhancing space endeavors in the years to come, there's also the need and opportunities to strengthen and enhance the role of strategic, commercial, and international collaboration and cooperation. In this context, there is a need to examine models that can address meeting demands of increased financial and other resource inputs. One major step in this direction is to address the private sector participation, not only in the provision of downstream services, but also in owning and operating satellite systems, as well as providing launch vehicle services. This would need consortia of industries coming together to produce state-of-art, cost-competitive satellites on one hand, and manufacturing launch vehicles and providing launch services on the other hand. Needless to emphasize, there are issues related to technology transfer from ISRO, the use of ISRO infrastructure for testing and other related requirements of launch vehicle and satellite manufacture, use of launch pads and auxiliary services to provide launch services through private entrepreneurs, apart from issues relating to confidentiality and the national security. It's gratifying to note that many of these developments related to national and international space endeavors and the resultant needs of transformative changes have been recognized by the government, and the recent restructuring of ISRO by the present government is a welcome step in this direction. A major initiative is needed from the private sector with the enabling role of the government. Further, the increased role of space systems in the strategic sector is yet to display its full potential. It is necessary to evolve a comprehensive policy and program relating to national security, in space systems playing an appropriate role. Toward the end of the last decade, the world has witnessed the induction of space forces as one of the independent service branches of the US military. The breakthrough in the reusable launch system, aggressive role of private sector in the US disrupting the balances either to in the markets, the phenomenal investments in space capabilities in our own region all call for strategic response from India in the new era unfolding in the space arena. Another dimension of increasing the level of space endeavor in the country is to increase bilateral and multilateral cooperation, particularly for science mission. Evolution and expansion of this strategy could see India playing an increasing role in manned space missions, creation of space habitats, lunar bases, and planetary exploration, all within the ambit of a global partnership framework like the model followed for the International Space Station. Further, India could also play an effective role in global missions relevant to disaster management, monitoring climate change, space traffic management, and such other emerging concepts. Regarding the international dimensions of space, with a unique legal regime that considers activities in outer space as a common province of all humankind and allows all states to freely explore and use any part of our space, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, the domain of outer space has witnessed many unique acts of cooperation at the international level. At the same time, due to its strategic and economic importance, it has also triggered intense competition for the use of resources such as orbit and radio spectrum in certain preferred ranges. On balance, however, the inherent unifying influence of space and its ability to convey interconnectedness of all human actions on Earth has been powerful enough to inspire a new culture that has enabled human minds to transcend their exclusive earthly image and engage in expansive visions of space travel, living in outer space and emerging as a multi-planetary species. I would like to conclude my talk by making some comments on the science and governance, a partnership in progress. With the growing progress in human civilizations over the past few centuries, is equally tempered by the great wars and other upheavals, a new trend of universal and overarching humanistic values as a basis for social, political, and cultural movements is manifesting. These humanistic values transcend national boundaries and connect all humanity. As a system or a discipline, the governance should draw its vital strength from these trends of reawakened humanistic values based on recognition of the rights of all people, including those who are disadvantaged or marginalized for access and livelihoods, equality, and justice. Secondly, there is the priority need for renaissance in governance, for enabling it to synchronize harmoniously with the culture and methods of science, which are strongly influencing the pathways traversed by societies in quest of further progress. Without such renaissance, modern challenges like climate change cannot be effectively confronted. Further, the governance system should recognize the realities of the increasingly interdependent nature of the world, resulting from the forces of globalization and also the imperatives of the natural world that we live in. India has been a land for time-tested values that indeed address all humankind with their universal outlook and limitless magnificence of human potential. These values need not be in contradiction with the scientific outlook and technoculture that dominate the environment of our times, but more importantly, that can be vital forces to ensure beneficial coexistence and growth in the order of a tremendously diverse world. In this context, values manifested through the life and actions of the tall leaders like Sri Sardar Patel stand as a strong testimony for the relevance and vitality of such values as the life current of good governance. They continue to serve as our beacons for our future journey of progress and hope. I would like to express my grateful thanks to Professor K.R. Sridharamurthy for his help in developing this manuscript and Professor Viraj Kumar for critically reviewing the same. Let me take this opportunity to heartily wish you all good health and progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasturirangan. That was a most insightful lecture, giving us the story of how the development took place, the foresight of Vikram Sarabhai, the organizational skills of Dr. Dhawan, and how multi-purpose, multi-technology combined with human resources to bring reassured outcomes. Space is future. Space requires values. Space requires governance. That is so beautifully covered. Thank you very much for it. Thanks once again. And thank you all the participants for being with us for this most magnificent lecture. Thank you, everybody. And we close the session now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rangan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a brilliant address, and we have learned a number of things which we'll discuss later, like this multidisciplinary approach, the systemic approach with an outcome in mind. I think, what you have said will require a lot of thinking. So I will request you to spend some time with us when you are here in Delhi.
Yes.
We would also like to hear from you the process of drafting the national education policy.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We are
Thank you.
much grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.